Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Honor the Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Ledford, and today we have Brent Beam with us. And it always makes me really excited to have men on this program because I really believe that to only talk about honoring the feminine among us women does us a disservice, that really we can learn so much from everyone's voice in this discussion. So as you know, we start each episode with a travel story and image. Because when I was traveling is when I really started to hear my intuition again. When the day-to-day chaos and expectations fell away, I started to hear her whisper. And I know she was always there, but starting to hear her again reminded me because she had gotten muffled. So today, the image that I chose from my collection is Diego and the Mask, and it was taken in Chichicastenango, Guatemala. On Thursdays and Sundays, the quiet cobblestone streets of Chichicastenango erupt into a vibrant and dynamic market where travelers and the Quiche Maya from the surrounding highlands converge to buy and sell. Diego and his brothers attend the market with their mother weekly. Growing up among the flowers and the vendors, they make friends along the way. Children are so open, they don't hide behind the mask that we create as we get older. This was the image that reminds me of our guest today, Brent Beam. Brent, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Shannon. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So share yourself with us. Tell us about you.
About me. Well, I'm a new dad. That feels like the biggest part of me these days. Our son Rowan was born almost 2 years ago, and I have learned more in the last 2 years about who I am as a person than ever before. And I can't even tell you specifically what the lessons have been, but I feel like who I am now and what I want to share with you, Shannon, and listeners is that I have a sense of humility that I have never had, and a sense of wonder and awe. And I love carrying that home to Rowan. I love the moments, few or far as between as they may be, where I can share that with my wife, Tara, and I certainly love doing that in my work as a therapist and psychologist, bringing that wonder and curiosity and just receptivity into the people that I get to see every day in my office.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about your practice and who you see?
Yeah. So I'm a psychologist in private practice in Asheville. Most of the people that I see are men. That's a bit of intentional, I think, client seeking on my part, really realizing that I love having and feel very fortunate to have had close, intimate friendships with a few men in my life, and that those friendships have been transformative for me. And so in my practice, where my heart is, is in helping men connect with other men. And I become a proxy, I think, for men, writ large, but also I'm just my own self in the session. So I like to create moments where men can be a little bit more emotional, a little bit more revealing about what's vulnerable or tender in their lives, even if it's something really painful or angering. And for us to delve into that together, that's what gets me going. That's why I wake up in the morning actually very excited to do my work. And when I text my wife during the day that I had a great session, usually it means that I was a little bit teary and the man sitting across from me was a little bit teary, and we made it through, and we're going to do it again. That feels like a huge success and something that I think most men these days need more of, myself included. Absolutely.
So when your clients seek you out, what are they often seeking within themselves?
I have so many men enter my life through the office, seeking to feel okay with who they are. I mean, I think that sounds really generic and cheesy and like cliche therapy talk, but the men that I get to talk with have often a deep sense of shame about some part of their life or something they've done or didn't do. Feelings of inadequacy and unworthiness, or they abound. And I mean, the men that I'm fortunate to work with, these are really wonderful, often sensitive, driven, high achieving men. These are men who do well and have good relationships, but carry this secret feeling of inadequacy and a pain that they have emotions that have no place in their life. Does that make sense in some way?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the therapy experience becomes one where whatever those hidden or repressed or secret or kind of walled off feelings are, those feelings finally have space, and they have space with another man, me. And as someone who's trying not to be judgmental or can be honest about my judgment, but not kind of recreate some wounds, I think that's really cathartic. And it helps a lot of the armoring fall off, once we have a chance to say, this is what hurts, and to have someone else say, I get that. That makes sense. Let's talk more about it.
As you talk about shame and vulnerability and unworthiness, I think that's such a human experience. And I think as women, we also are playing in that arena, and that we have had some wonderful women of late, women like Brene Brown, who've given us some vocabulary to really talk into these things and feel into them and go into those darker places. And I think it's so beautiful that both genders are willing to take some of those steps, because I think that's what heals what's going on in our world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And if I could take that maybe in a direction you're pointing, that this is not just a man's problem. I mean, I happen to be a man doing the work with men, but this is not unique to men. Men have maybe different kind of shackles or obstacles in their life to contend with, but we all have gendered or just any number of barriers to feeling our own feelings and being okay with that. And it does seem to me like when any of us can get to a place of empathy with one other person in the world, then things start to change. And do we ever need that more than right now? I mean, I feel like it's, without really intending to make a political commentary, just the pain and bewilderment and super strong emotions on multiple sides of this election, I think really bring that into focus for me, especially this week. Just how feeling heard, feeling important, feeling worthy of someone else's attunement can change a person's life.
Yeah. And that space for really being heard, like truly being heard, and for someone really listening, I think that's happening less in our world than we would like to admit, where I've found that, I loved where you started with that you'd had some really deep relationships with men in your life. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've found a real sisterhood with the women in my life. And I didn't even realize I was missing it. Yeah. And it's beautiful. And it's opened my eyes in so many ways and helped me feel more deeply myself and the other women in my life. And with that, it then opens me up to feel the whole world more deeply and creates more self-compassion in some ways.
It does. It's like this magic elixir that, conjures a whole bunch of potions all at once, and you can cast spells and do magic with it. I mean, but it's not magic. I think that's what's so maybe mind blowing for me. And maybe you're saying this for yourself, that we sometimes don't realize how much we need it and miss it, but also we don't realize how easy it is to get. It can just be a matter of saying, I want this. And would you want to try to do this too, and inviting our friends or our loved ones or new sisters or new brothers into the process. In other cities I lived, was able with some friends to form these very informal men's groups. These were not groups where I was acting as a psychologist. I was just one of the guys in the group, and we get together every other week for a few hours to have a potluck and just talk about what's real. And that was the agenda. And it never failed that I was initially really worried that it wouldn't work. And then after the first 5 minutes of the first meeting, utterly convinced that this was exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah. It's still...
We want to bond. We need to connect. That's it.
Yeah. We're looking for unity and connection and, again, feeling heard and seen. And I think that there's beautiful sacred space where we can all do that. And the more of that we can have, and the more of us that walk into that space with that intention, it just cascades out. For me, I had to feel into, though, around sisterhood, my old story around women are catty and mean and we don't support each other, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had to realize that was old and let some of that go, because it's not now that things don't come up or I don't have prickly instances in my relationship with the women in my life. It's that when it comes up, I don't go, see, I knew it. There's more proof that women aren't nice and that I can't trust this. Now I say it's that curiosity that was brought about by your son, right? It's that, oh, wait a minute, what happened there? And to get curious around that. And I have realized that becoming a mother a little over 3 years ago was the space and the shift in that for me. That I could have that.
Yeah. Parenthood really kind of cracks open one's spirit in all the best ways. Lets a lot of light in. I'm reminded as you're talking about that, Shannon, that I had the chance to give a small little speech at this men's retreat about a year ago. And I went into that well prepared and had all my notes and PowerPoint and fancy pictures, and I was going to deliver a great performance. But I also carried this gut level fear that the men in this room who came for the express purpose of being at a men's retreat would not want to talk with each other. Like that's similar to your kind of ingrained bias or stereotype that you had. And of course I was proved wrong. Like everyone wanted to bond and I didn't have to do anything. I just said, hey, let's talk. And everyone talked and it was amazing. But I do, I can relate to that for me, I feel like it is partly gendered, that I do even in session, even when I can put on the therapist hat and shed a lot of my own, I kind of can tap into a higher mind or maybe a deeper spirit in the room here. I still carry that. I'm still a little bit scared when another guy is sitting across from me and I'm wondering, is he measuring me up? Because I'm measuring him up, and who's the better one here and who's going to be soft first? I haven't yet shaken that, but I am, like you, very glad to have moments in my work, with my friends, with my partner, with my son, where there are those moments of connection. And I don't think it requires, for any of us, anything other than a willingness to be curious. Right? It doesn't require a degree or a certain profession or to have a deep spiritual practice. I don't think. I think it's just being curious enough to say, what's more here, and what's more between us, and can we somehow, in whatever clumsy way, can we somehow approach that together, hang in there until we discover it.
I think you've hit on something so huge. And for me, in the intuition piece, it's not that everyone has to pick up and travel around the world to hear their intuition again. It can be in those 30 seconds here of curiosity and awareness, the 2 minutes over there. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. And slowly it starts to spiral down and get deeper in so many different areas. Yeah.
I think when I I remember, I hadn't remembered this, Shannon, in a long time, probably 12 or more years ago when I was in some portion of training for my work, seeking out a therapist of my own and leaving a voicemail for the person I ended up working with saying, I think the thing that I'm struggling with most is knowing how to trust my intuition. And I don't know that I'm that much better than I used to be, but I'm a little bit more better. I've got more practice with that. And I think for me, learning to trust my intuition has been the result of having wonderful women and men in my life who do it far better than I do, right? Who can hear me. It's not a solo practice. I didn't read the right books, and that wasn't my pathway. My pathway has been being really fortunate to have deeply, kind of strongly attuned people in my life, friends, in every domain at the right moments. And I think year by year, relationship by relationship, I get a little bit better at that.
Yeah. Do you have ways that you find that you honor the feminine and stay in touch with your intuition? Like, do you have a daily practice or something that comes up weekly where you feel into that?
I wish I could say that I'm disciplined with that and purposeful, but I'm not. But I can tell you what works for me. I really feel that being able to be a therapist is my practice. That I know I get paid to be of service to others, but to have a chance to tune in as best I can hour after hour to people and listen deeply, and that's an amazing challenge for me. And in the moments when I can do it, I get so much out of that. I get the chance to practice empathy every day, and I can't not do it because this is my profession. This is like a skill that I need to have. So actually going to work every day is a way for me to have built-in practice for, empathy and honoring what I would consider would be my intuition or the feminine. I journal every now and then. I do some journal writing about my business vision, and it's really helpful to give myself space to spout out numbers and ego-related things about I want my business to be A, B, and C and this big and grow in this direction, and then to come back and say, and what I really want to feel like is this. And that is, the anchor point comes after I've done all this stirring of the water. But that's really helpful. And I think the other thing for me is truly to have friends and a partner who are more intuitively oriented than I am, and that I can sit with, friends in business, friends in life, where they take more initiative talking about their feelings than I do. And I'm very willing to be a student of that for as long as I'm alive. So those are the practices that I have. I really do envy and admire people with more disciplined kind of conscious practices, but I feel like, again, like bit by bit, year after year, there are more moments that are obviously intuitive moments in my life. And having Rowan has been the biggest one, where the whole point of, I feel like, of our parenthood at this stage of his life is to just tune into him and to try to hang with him and do the dance that he does. And, literally and emotionally, just try to match him and be there. And that is such a great, wonderful instruction for, what I would say is my intuition or my feminine.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And I actually love the idea of lack of discipline, if you will, because I also feel that way. I can more point to the way certain themes have shifted in the last year and a half or 2 years in my life around themes, versus this sort of regimented practice that I have, and I also, I come from the same cloth of, when I think about business vision, I'm with you. I'm thinking about like numbers and how that works, like all of that. And, as a woman, that's very often where my colleagues and my team are not coming from, right? It's very often not their jumping off point. And then I've really cultivated that practice of how I want to feel.
Yeah. It's a cultivated practice, disciplined or not. It's cultivated.
Oh,
right? Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Disciplined or not, it is cultivated. Oh, that one hit me. Cause sometimes I get my stick out, my lack of self-compassion stick around. I'm not disciplined enough, like.
Yeah, bad you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because my husband is really disciplined in his practices. Like he very much has a morning ritual that he has done for, a decade or more. And I really admire that.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it is
I
so not
absolutely.
for me.
Yeah. This might be a bit of an unfair comparison. And when Tara hears this interview, she'll correct me, but she's a very passionate gardener, very knowledgeable about the botanical world, and has always had a thriving, just beautiful spread of a garden wherever she's lived until we moved here and bought a house and renovated it and had Rowan all within a year. And we started a garden, and then it just kind of laid there for the last year and a half or more. And it's really, I think, a real source of pain for her that her most joyful expression hasn't yet had a chance here in Asheville, but the garden still grows. The things that we barely put in the ground are still there. The flowers still come up. The tomato plants were kind of pathetic, but we got some tomatoes. Even with a very poor discipline, the growth, what was going to grow regardless of our discipline. You know what I mean? When we're more disciplined, it will grow even better and be even more abundant. But it's not like, at least if this is a fair analogy, it's not like not watering the garden for a couple of weeks means the whole thing's going to dry up.
Yeah.
It just means things are going to grow differently.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it's funny because as we started to have this whole discussion, I really felt into that admiration that I have, and yet that work I've done about sort of not imposing that on myself just because I admire it.
Yeah. It is hard to not be your own worst enemy with something like that, and to give space for. I don't know. I find, maybe you can speak to this too, Shannon. There's a part of me that's very cerebral and mechanistic and methodical, and then there's a part of me that really wants to be airy fairy and just kind of like super trusting and deeply spiritual. And I think that what I'm finding in my own life is that I gotta find a way to let all that be there. Because at this point, at 39 and a half, neither of those sides has trumped the other one. Like they're both there. They don't really make great playmates, but I got to play with them both. And that's probably meaning that I'm not going to have a great discipline practice in either area. But when I can have this conversation with you and have another conversation with, my CPA, and then go back and forth, like that's the way for me to kind of stay dialed in just enough. And I'm starting to believe that just enough is really a great, that's a great achievement, to be just enough. That's fine.
The visual that came to me is that idea of how we weave our lives at any given moment. Right. And so if there's those aspects of ourself as threads, and so we're pulling this thread through a bit and pulling that thread through a bit. And I see it also with the skills we've picked up along the way. Right. And how we weave that together, and that really that's all the uniqueness of us. And it's really our relationship with that uniqueness versus the actual weaving. Right? Like versus the tapestry itself. It's not really that as much as our relationship to it. Right?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what it brought up for me. And yeah, that there's times, I think, because I too, I'm in my early 40s, and I think the beautiful thing about it is the tools that I have in knowing the different aspects of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. You and me and hopefully everyone, would say that the weaving of the tapestry has been an amazing thing, right? The fact that all these threads have somehow come together and created something of substance, is really nothing short of a miracle, and nothing short of just being human, right? It's miraculous and totally plain and ordinary at the same time.
Yeah.
And I really feel for all of us, my clients, you, me certainly, Rowan and his upbringing and the life he's going to live, that there are so many opportunities and so many people that will remind us that that's not enough, that that's actually wrong, that the tapestry should look a certain way, or there shouldn't be a tapestry, it should be a single thread or just a certain pattern. And it requires a lot of unlearning, or maybe some are more fortunate than others and just kind of click into the right thing early on. But I think I think about this in my life, and I think about it mostly as lessons learned from my clients, that it's often not about finding the thing that's missing. It's about getting rid of the obstacle to the thing that's already there.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that feels like that relationship with peace, because in my 20s, I thought there should be only, 4 colors and they should look in this pattern. And in my 30s, maybe there were some more colors, but they maybe still had to have a pattern, especially in my early 30s. And now I can feel more. And part of it's trusting for me.
What do you trust? What's that trusting like?
There's that trusting in my intuition. There's that trusting in that knowing. There's that trusting in the inner divinity in myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's those moments that I don't trust. Still.
Yeah.
Any of it.
Not the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference is, again, the awareness around that, right? So I think I don't spend as much time in the non-trusting, as much as like when I feel that really coming up, I start to feel like, hey, what's going on here? And really getting that curiosity again. I mean, our whole talk is really about curiosity.
Isn't it? Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, because that reminds me that, I would probably say the same for me, that it's, if anything works in my life, it's that I'm more tolerant of my own shit than I ever used to be. Not that it's gone away, but that I found a way to be a little bit less uncomfortable with it, and with great loving friends and a wonderful partner and others, I'm reminded often that it's okay. I have to be the only one to remind myself of that. None of the beautiful and lovely people in my life have their shit figured out any more than I do, but we're all willing to talk about it, and that changes us.
I think there's that trusting too, and that I can be more myself, and that those in my life will love me and accept me.
Yeah.
Even as I guess the analogy that comes for me is sort of like loving my body, and the body image stuff, like loving my body right where I am right now, even as I get healthier and stronger. Right?
Both of these things are true.
Yeah. So it's not as if like, this is who I am and this is what you've got to accept. It's about accepting who I am right now, knowing that I'm continuing to evolve and progress. And it's an interesting balance, I think.
I'm reminded in you saying that I heard this, a very experienced older American monk speak at, I don't know, some university I was at years ago. And someone asked her, after 40 or 50 years of meditating and cultivating your practice, aren't you something like, aren't you a better person or something, like that? And her response was, no, I'm no different of a person, but I'm more accepting of who I am.
Yes, that.
Yeah, yeah. That's it.
So, did you really desire to be a dad? Was that a role that you really desired?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, it's probably I don't know the reason, but for some reason it was something that I craved, I guess, when I was in high school, when it was clear to me that it was not a legitimate or practical possibility. I think I really craved relating to a child, and specifically a son. And I would have been delighted to have a daughter, but we happened to have a son. And so, yeah, Shannon, I did have a strong desire to be a dad. I feel incredibly blessed, fortunate, lucky beyond belief to have the opportunity. We almost didn't have the opportunity, but we did. And, I feel lucky to be a new dad at the age of 38, 39, because what I think it changes for me relative to what I might have experienced in my 20s if I'd had a child then, or even in my earlier 30s, is that every moment matters now. I'm aware that I'm only going to be healthy for so much of Rowan's life. God forbid something happened, but if we play the odds, I'll live, I don't know, maybe till my 80s and be healthy if I'm really lucky. But like, my time with him is shorter than it would be if I was 31 or 25 or 20. And while there's a bittersweetness in that for me, I wouldn't have it any other way. Mm. And I too have a wonderful dad. So no doubt that part of my desire to be a dad comes from a place of having a dad who's in his own way quite a sensitive and yet analytical person. I know the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and I'm grateful for him. I'm grateful that I get to be to be a dad too, just like he got to be.
Yeah. That's interesting because I've always wanted to be a mom. And I know that women have, people think women have that more maybe or something. But I also waited because I was 38 when my daughter was born, and my husband's a bit older than I am. So, but he also really desired to be a dad, and it's a really fun place for he and I to play, in parenthood together. It's not always easy, but it's,
we were talking before the interview here, how it's not often easy.
Yeah. But in that beautiful way of having, in being older parents, I mean, my feeling around it is I had more space and more life experience to create more space for my daughter. Right. And that feels good. Yeah. I would have been a different parent 10, 15 years ago. And that's not a good or a bad. It just would have been different.
It would have been different. Yeah. Yeah. It's probably for the best that we can't undo history. Can't play out these theoretical lives that we would have lived.
Yeah. I guess in my regret bank for waiting so long is my mom, who was a wonderful, wonderful mother, has Alzheimer's. And so she doesn't get to be the grandmother that I envisioned, or that I know she envisioned or desired. So, yeah, it's funny how you play in that a bit too.
Yeah. Age and maybe like the what's the finiteness, the finitude of life becomes a reality. As we have kids in our late 30s or early 40s, that our parents age, their age becomes more of a reality in our own lives, right? And their longevity is obviously reduced as compared to what it was when we were younger and they were younger. It's interesting. I think kind of amazing to be a parent, to be in the middle of those two, right? To see my son at the very beginning of his life, my parents, very healthy and relatively young, but still not at the beginning of their life. And here I am, arguably smack dab in the middle of mine. and all of this is happening at the same moment in time for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So was it your desire when you became a therapist to work with men? Or is that something that evolved?
No, it totally evolved. I didn't even know that I was never convinced that I wanted to be a therapist. I was convinced sometime in undergrad that I wanted to have some kind of work that let me be in deep conversations with people. And I thought that would be in ministry. And I grew up in a church and had a really, really loving, bright, empathic youth minister who I emulated as best I could. But I entered graduate school for psychology kind of reluctantly. I mean, it was my choice, but, or I'd just say conflicted. I had also applied to some divinity schools and was torn about which path to go, and made the decision partly out of pragmatics that the cost of the divinity school I wanted to go to was prohibitive at the time, and getting a doctoral degree in counseling psychology would have been paid for through grad assistantship. So,
it's funny where life leads us, isn't
right,
it?
Yeah, there it goes. And I felt throughout the first couple of years of grad school that, not that I had made the wrong choice, but I didn't really know what the other side would be like, the other side of the grad school process. And even in my first few jobs, in the first probably 10 years of being a psychologist, I had moments where I could feel how potent therapy was, but it really hasn't been until the last 2 years being in private practice where I've been forced to ask myself, what do I really do? Why do I do it? Why do I want to wake up in the morning to be a business owner? And who is my ideal, business client, but also therapy client? And now that I have had to ask those questions, I get to see what I really love. And that might change in a year or two, or, who knows? I don't believe it's static, but I certainly have an abundance of confidence in myself and in the power of the work that I get to do. Because I've had the benefit and the challenge of having to assess that really head on over the last couple of years.
I love that.
Yeah. I wish I could say I always wanted to be a therapist and I always wanted to work with men and had the vision since I was 15. I've never been able to see a horizon more than a couple weeks away. So I knowing
in
that,
some ways, Brent came up with well, how boring would that answer have been? Or how boring would your life would have been if it's just, you've just known forever. Yeah. No, that's a great point. I wouldn't know how to live a life that I could forecast that clearly. I crave it sometimes, but no, I can't say I stumbled into it, but in my own amateur way for so many years, I think I have been able to listen to my intuition. Sometimes it's been very, very vocal in my own head, and sometimes it's been stumbling in the dark and kind of trusting the rough edges. But that's, I believe, why I love my life, that my work, my relationships, my family are all deeply fulfilling. And I mean, this is going to sound like total cheeseball, but I'm super happy just to get to be a part of it. I feel like that. As an overall feeling of my life, I feel that too. And it makes me a little bit emotional. It makes me almost not want to share it for those that aren't experiencing that. But what I get to do, who I get to interact with, the lives I get to touch, it feels good.
So
I
we're
am
alive.
of service in the way I'm meant to be in this particular moment. And that feels good.
Yeah.
And not that that's not going to evolve, or not that it won't look different 6 months from now. But yeah.
Yeah, you find, what's the story? The alchemist, the little boy,
Love that story.
Santiago, as he goes through and discovers what his heart really desires. And that's, I feel like that's, for those of us who are so fortunate to even have a couple moments of that, life is really so rich. And if we can be of service to others and finding that for themselves, then what better work is there to do?
Are you ready for the random questions?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So the first one is, if you could sit down with any woman, alive or dead, for a chat and tea, who would it be?
You know who it would be? I mean, this is a spontaneous answer. If you gave me an hour, I'd maybe have a different response. But I think it would be maybe my dad's mom. I don't have I remember her, but she was always very, very quiet and seemed kind of anxious, a little bit uncomfortable in her own skin when we would visit her house. Sweet, but a bit timid. And maybe it's I had this strong desire maybe 5 or 7 years ago to know more about my dad's dad. And I got to interview, loosely kind of interview people who knew him or worked for him, when he was still living. And I think this was probably like my way of identifying through my dad's lineage, who am I and how did I become who I am? I try to answer that based on what I see in my own dad, what I see in my dad and mom's relationship, what I glean about my granddad, or now I guess I'd want to sit with my dad's mom.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we'd say much. I think I'd really just enjoy sitting on her porch and one of those old metal bench, rocking benches on the porch, and just sit and have a glass of tea. I think that would be all the connection that I'd need. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea when it goes to legacy and heritage. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And our second question is, where would you most like to travel?
Oh my gosh. Since having a kid, I feel like all my whatever focus I had on myself and my hobbies and my interests has been buried deep. So I think I could have a desire.
I can almost feel your answer being any place where I could sleep for a couple of days uninterrupted.
I'll take that place. Yeah. I haven't traveled very far in the world. I'd like to, friends of mine came back from a honeymoon that they took in Australia. And I think I'd probably say Australia or New Zealand. The little images I've seen on TV or in movies convinces me that I would love the natural beauty there. But I mean, really, tongue in cheek, but also very seriously, we live in Asheville, and I'm so excited now that Rowan's getting older just to go backpacking in these woods, in these mountains. I'm in a place where I always wanted to live. I'm here, and I just want to get into it more. I'm really stoked about that.
Oh, I love that. So how do we reach out and connect with you?
Well, 2 ways would be easy. My website is Beam Counseling, my name or last name BEAM counseling.com. And my email is Brent@beamcounseling.com.
And we will put all of that in the show notes for this episode over at honorthefeminine.com so people can very easily find you.
Great. I'd be glad to.
Thank you so much for today. This was so fun.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, this is a real delight. Hope to do it again with you sometime.
Hello again, everyone. It was great to have Brent on the podcast today. And I love having men on this program that honor the feminine, because I think when we add their voices to the mix, the voices of those men that are honoring the feminine and creating sacred space and talking about what is real, that it just enlivens the conversation in really dynamic ways. And I love that Brent really does create the space for men to feel into themselves and into their lives. And really he is holding sacred space that I believe is so important for the men in our lives. So if you would like to connect with Brent, you can go over to the show notes for this episode at honorthefeminine.com. Today is March 1st, and we have kicked off our Cultivate Connection. So if you're listening to this live and you haven't had a chance to sign up for Cultivate Connection, you can go over to honorthefeminine.com or into our virtual sacred space on Facebook at Honor the Feminine Daily. And you can start to feel into the Cultivate Connection 8 days of unfolding. And we're starting today, March 1st. And there's a daily theme and a daily goddess and daily rituals for you to deepen into. And I'm just excited about it. It has come together so beautifully, and I just feel honored to share it with you. The practice will culminate with a circle in celebration of International Women's Day on March 8th, where we can come together and celebrate ourselves and each other. And that will be really fun. And that'll be a virtual circle in celebration. So all of that information will come to you through the Cultivate Connection process. I'm so excited to cultivate connection with you as we each deepen in with ourselves, with each other, and with the world. Have a beautiful day.